Hello, I'm Robert Ellsberg. I'm the publisher of Orbis Books, and I'm here with Joyce Rupp, who is a retreat leader, a speaker, the author of innumerable books, some of them with Orbis, and one of the most popular spiritual guides of our time. And I think if you've ever wished that you could meet someone who truly understands you and knows what life is all about, really seems to, and has wise, compassionate insight about the deepest questions, struggles, and longings of your heart, and you could take that person home with you. Well, I think that's sort of what it's like to read one of Joyce's books, and her new one in particular. We met last year to discuss her book, Vessels of Love, Prayers, and Poems for the Later Years of Life, which has been enormously popular and has also won several awards. Both of us are older now, me in particular, I think. But I'm very glad to announce that she has a new book with Orbis, which I'll show you here. The Years of Ripening, Reflections on Aging in the Later Years. And this is a companion to her previous book, this time offering not poems and prayers, but short essays that allow her to elaborate in a very personal voice about some of the spiritual dimensions of aging. I know she conceived of these two books from the beginning as companions, though either one of them can be read on its own. And I guarantee that if you are moved and inspired by one, you'll really want to read the other one. So welcome, Joyce.
Thank you,
When we
Rob.
spoke last year, I began by asking you to reflect on the title of your book, Vessels of
Mhm.
Love, and I was very touched by your reflection on the image of a vessel that is, on the one hand, being emptied, but at the same time being filled. And I wonder if you could begin by sharing your thoughts behind this new title, The Years of Ripening.
Thank you, Robert. First of all, what I would like to say is that I'm so grateful that Orbis has published these books on aging. You know, um, and I'll just briefly want to say, my first chapter is on elderhood and aging and ageism, and I have always so respected Orbis because you really focus on peace and justice. And it's only been since I have gotten into my 80s that I realize how much older people in our society are put on the margins.
Mhm.
And one of the hardest things for me in aging is not I don't it's not my physical self, it's not, less energy, it's how society views me as very dismissible and invisible, as so many will say. So that's I just want to say thank you so much for that. About the title, actually, um, a woman who had been on retreat with me in Minneapolis wrote to me one time about her moving into older age as a ripening time, and that image really struck me, and I thought right away of in Jim Finley's book, uh, Merton's Palace of Nowhere. He quotes Merton as saying an apple on a tree doesn't get red, ripe, and juicy, by struggling and really working at it. But it really hangs on the tree and it allows the sun to shine on it and the water and the roots to feed it. And in that, it ripens into the apple that it's meant to be. And that's what I think about elderhood is that since our birth, we were born with all of this potential in us and it's there, it's been sitting there, we've developed some of it, some of the virtues and qualities, but then we get to elderhood and we take a much closer look at who we are and what still needs to ripen or develop in us, and in order for us to become the whole person that we are really meant to be. And so I find that quite exciting, for myself. That's certainly been true.
I'm glad you mentioned that point about how younger people in society tend to make older people feel invisible,
Mhm,
as if they're not quite there, as if they don't really count, as if they don't matter,
mhm,
and the ways that, well, how hurtful that can be, and the ways that that can also be uh, kind of affect people's self-identity too,
mhm,
and
mhm,
feel that, well, no one listens to me, no one cares about me, my life is sort of over, and I'm just here on the shelf.
mhm,
Um, and I thought that one of the things that was so great about your book was um, to kind of open up the window on this idea that that this is life is a journey, and this is one of the stages along the way. And like every other part of that journey, there are opportunities and there's work to be done.
Mhm.
And even though perhaps we don't have infinite amount of time ahead of us, that it's not too late to begin.
Mhm.
And this and that is actually important work, both for ourselves and for others, for the world.
Yeah, yeah. My chapter on identity, I have those 4 essays on that. And, just this week I was talking to a woman who's 87. She has some health issues. Her husband died a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, I think. Just sold her home, moved into a senior residence. And she's such a wise person. And she said to me, in my mind, I see this very delineating line that I have my past life with my husband, my house, my good health, and now I see myself. I have to find a new identity, and I
Mm,
still have talents and gifts, and I know I can use them. But my life is not the way it was before, and I'm open, but I'm searching, and I don't know now who I am. I
mm.
cannot, and I love that she said the path to my past is closed. And I thought, how wise that she's not clinging to that and she's open to what might be available to her. And that whole chapter on identity is part of that. How do we know who we are today? How do we find meaning here now and not just want the way we used to be? You
Well, I think that those are, experiences that are don't belong just to the later years of life.
Mm-hmm.
And many of
Right.
us, like myself, included, have had experiences of loss or
Mm-hmm.
brokenness or something that failed,
Right.
and or transition, and a feeling like, well, like who am I now? Trying
Mm-hmm.
to figure
Mm-hmm.
that out again. And
Mm-hmm.
it makes me think again as I was really reading through this book this time to read it, not putting myself in the shoes of somebody who's in their 80s or 90s, but of myself or younger people, and
Mm-hmm.
realize that so many of the things that you're writing about are the kind of wisdom that's contained in all kinds of spiritual classics, whether it's about letting go or serenity or gratitude,
Mm-hmm.
hope and purpose,
Mm-hmm.
dealing with loss, anxiety, regret, grief.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know that your sort of intended demographic are people your age and older, but I wondered if there were things here that you were distilled here for you as you've come to writing this book from a whole lifetime that you feel you understand or know better than you did at other times.
Boy, I really appreciate that insight, Robert, because it is so true. I mean, I think of my own journey, and I mean, since I've been actually in high school, but all through my life, I have searched for the meaning in life, and every decade of my life, I've kind of re-identified myself in terms of, you know, my career, my personal life, my relationships, and all of that, and it's just so true that, what I think is so I think all that's in that book, especially I think the section on detachment, on not clinging to everything, on being open. Well, there's just a lot of parts of the book I think could apply, but just that whole thing that we're always re-identifying ourselves, we're finding more parts to ourselves. Jung would call it individuation, and so. But what's different, I think, in elderhood is that it's our last chance.
Hmm, hmm.
Otherwise, you always think, well, I got 20, 30 years. Yes, I'm growing, I'm learning. Oh,
Hmm.
yeah, I didn't know this about myself. Oh, I really want to emphasize more of this in how I come through and help the world. But all of a sudden, you go, wow, 10 years or 20 years, why they go by pretty fast. So,
Well, in a lot of the spiritual classics, there and in earlier times there was that whole idea of the memento mori and kind of
mhm,
memory of death, keeping death
yeah,
before you at all times,
yes.
and that would kind of concentrate your mind and give you a
Hmm.
sense of urgency.
Hmm.
And I guess, for your audience here, that sort of goes without saying. You don't really have to remind them of that. What you instead are reminding them of is that is that it's not just that you're waiting for, or death is around the corner at any moment, could
Hmm.
could
Hmm.
happen, but also opportunities are right around the corner. They're right at your fingertips, right in this moment, if
Hmm.
you choose to seize them.
One of the things, Robert, that I really wanted to be so sure about in this, both in Vessels of Love and this book, is to show that growing older is not just about limitations and
Mhm.
loss. It's not just about death is ahead for you, but I just wanted this book to have a balance, and I think it does. That there's so much good, there's so much benefit about growing older. The perspectives we have, and the memories that carry us. Just this week, I met with a women's group, and I asked them to reflect on memories of when they felt the sacred in their life. And oh, I mean, it was just so amazing how quickly people could remember and felt hopeful. And that was my whole point about in our culture today, how do we find hope and how do we keep joy? And
Mhm.
it's those good memories. And elders have lots of those, even no matter if their life has been tough.
Well, you write also a lot about the treasuring small things, and of every day. And I love the story that you cite from scripture where Elijah is in
Mm,
the desert and is about to kind of give up and die, and he goes
yeah.
into a sleep, and an angel comes and touches him on the shoulder and says, "Wake up." Uh, and then he sees that there's something to eat and there's something to
Yeah.
drink or whatever. And you
Mhm.
ask the question, reflect on who are the angels, in your own life. And
Mhm.
sometimes we don't even, it's like even just sort of framing it that way, that
Yeah.
that allows us to see that just a very kind of ordinary act of kindness, or compassion, or
Mhm.
companionship,
Mhm.
or a beautiful sunset, or a squirrel running around outside your window, can all be kind of angels tapping us on the shoulder and saying, "Wait a
Mhm.
second, wake up.
Yeah.
There's more here
Yeah.
than just death and loss and
Exactly.
decline."
Yeah, yeah. One of that section I wrote, find joy in the smallest things. I have a friend from a long time, at least 25 years, I think, and she's had a lot of physical pain for as long as I remember her. I don't think she's ever felt physical pain. She has found such joy when she moved into this one home of hers, where she's still in now. There was a small pine tree. And I said to her, "You watch the pine tree." I said, "It's going to be your friend." That
Mm,
pine tree now is so huge. It's so gorgeous. She finds the best joy in that tree. She
mm,
watches it through the four seasons. And, she just loves it. She'll talk about just the birds that are in the tree, or the raindrops on the end of the needles, and that kind of thing. And she's such a good example to me of how it doesn't take a lot to help
mhm,
us to find something of satisfaction. And, that pine tree in a way is her angel, you know. So,
mm, mm.
mm.
Do you feel that people in later years have more greater sense of urgency or hunger for this kind of wisdom, or that you want to just remind them not to put it off, and that
Yeah,
no
yeah.
time like the present.
Well, I think readership's so diverse, Robert, and I think there are older people or anyone really, just keep so busy that they don't have to think about what is happening in their life, don't have to think about their mortality, and just, they're unconsciously doing that. It's not, I think, a deliberate thing. So I think there's that whole dimension. Then I think there are elders who have grown in being reflective. Sometimes they're forced to be reflective because they're alone, living alone now, where they lived with a spouse or a partner, and so they have more of a tendency to be reflective in that way, and but I do think for most older people that they become more keenly aware of, like, the simple things of life that bring pleasure.
Mm,
Something as simple as, today I'm getting out of bed and my hip doesn't hurt. This is going to be a good day for me. Um, just, I think, or meeting somebody new at some kind of gathering, whatever it might be. and sensing that they have kinship with them. My mother was in her late 70s when she found someone she called her best friend.
Mm-hmm.
And they had just a wonderful friendship. It was so unexpected and so beautiful. So, that just that openness to what can be there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I there are there's so many passages in the book that of just, I mean, you write poems, but that are just so poetic and just
Mm,
um I that I wanted to just kind of treasure. and
thank
and
you. Mm,
if I could read one that I really liked.
mm,
You said the absence felt by elders is not just about relationships with others. My own loneliness comes from a lack of union with an unseen sphere of existence beyond this one. I know in an unproven way that there's a tiny thread inside of me, like the thin, silky filament in a spider's web, connecting me to a world beyond this life. I'm lonely not for a person, but a dimension, a sphere where I know with all my heart true peace and unity exists, no judgment, hatred, indifference, nothing that divides the union among beings. I believe I knew this once, experienced the utter joy of it. This memory lives in me. This is where I belong. Death will release me, free me to rejoin that amazing sphere. And
thank you,
I
Robert. You
took from
read that
that
beautifully.
that this idea also that not only are there's opportunities to learn new things, but
Mhm.
there's an opportunity to kind of recover or remember things that we once knew,
Yeah.
that got lost along the way somewhere of life.
I love that. I love that, Robert. I love how you read that passage. I think it's just so true. And because it's like we pull back a bit and we look, and then I think in that, I have that essay on the natural monastery, as if we reflect and we let like the door open inside of us, then what was there waiting can come forth. It's kind of been set aside, almost like put in, another room or something of our heart. And it and that is just how, I mean, I got in touch with that part of my life again as I reflected on death. That I wanted to do a chapter on death, and to see it not as something that's so negative, but something that is natural, that it's real. And I had to again get in touch with my own feelings about death, my thoughts about death, and that. Um, but to see it as something that gives me hope, instead of giving me dread. Um, and that piece that you wrote really came to me when I was working on that chapter, because I have to always ask myself, what do I think and feel about this? How have I grown into this? I want this to be real and not just a head, some intellectual thing that I'm putting out there. So yeah. Mhm.
Um, I love the poem that you quote by Natalie Diaz, where she says, "There are wild flowers in my desert,
Yeah.
seeds sleeping." And
Mhm.
you go on to reflect, what might be the wild flowers that sleep in the arroyos of my inner world? Am I aching for them to come alive? That
Yeah.
is also, again, going back to that other idea that part of what you're talking about is kind of going into the quarry of our own memories and of our own
Mhm.
experience,
Mhm.
and kind of seeing the seeds of life that were there all along,
Yeah.
and that are awaiting, their season to
Mhm.
bloom.
hmm It's true. It's really true. I was talking to someone this week too about how, you know, there's a number of older people that in their 80s and 90s who first started writing or started painting, who became really famous in the later years. And it was pulling out some of those seeds. But I think more than that, it's the people that become very mellow, in their later years. They could have been kind of, edgy, sharp, but something happens in them and they mellow, they become kinder, they become more
Mm.
compassionate. And that essay I have on mentors of our older age, I am so grateful for people that I have known all through my life, of many ages, but that without their ever, I think, intending it, they just became mentors for me of how I wanted to be, a good person, a kind person, a compassionate person, a generous person. Um, and I think, I think in elderhood, we certainly can be mentors for others,
You think people who do that, that it sort of comes naturally, or have they read books like yours and done all your exercises, or is it just certain people have a kind of habit of being that?
I think it's grace, to be honest with you. I think something happens within the person that, just like the Elijah story, a moment comes or moments and people begin to change for whatever reason. And I have a story in there about a sister in my community who was just, you didn't want to be around her too long because she was really snappy. And, but when the last 2 years before she died, I loved to go in and sit with her. She was pretty much bedridden then. And I think what happened is that she just began to surrender instead of fighting all her life. And as she surrendered and gave herself over to, released herself into her life, she just, that kindness came forth in her, that seed that had been waiting in there. And so, I'm not sure how it happens. It's probably different for many people, but I just believe that if we are open and we give ourselves to desiring to be as true as we can be to who we are, that it can happen for us.
Hmm.
We may have to pay a bit of a price for it in the beginning, but that it can happen. Yeah,
And some of the things that we don't learn how to let go of will be taken from us, whether we like it or not.
that's right.
There was a story you told. I mean, sometimes, someone can reframe something for you and you really like your eyes open. There was a
Mhm.
story I think you told of a woman who'd had some terrible loss, maybe a fire, or her car was stolen with a lot of protection. I can't remember
Oh,
what it
yeah.
was. And she was like sort of obsessing about it. And her son said, "It's already gone. Let it go." Like,
Yes,
like all you're thinking about, all you're worrying about is not going to make it come
that's
back.
right. Yeah, her car was stolen and she had lots of things she appreciated in the car. And yeah, and he was the angel for her.
Yes.
That was the turning point. That's a really good example, Robert. Yeah, thank you for remembering that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of my favorite chapters was the one on coming home.
Mm,
Can you talk a little bit about that? I was very touched by that.
yeah, yeah. In fact, I want remember I had marked that because I wanted to, you know, Frederick Buechner talks about us coming home, and I think that to me is, if I would have had another title to this book, it might have been Coming Home,
Hmm.
because home is really who we are and are meant to be. And I quoted a couple lines from The Wizard of Oz when
Yes.
Glinda the Good, she tells Dorothy that it's time for her to come home, and Dorothy doesn't. She says, "I don't understand." And then Glinda explains, "Home is a place we all must find, child. It's not just a place where you eat or sleep. Home is knowing your mind, knowing your heart, knowing your courage. If we know ourselves, we're always home anywhere." Isn't that beautiful?
Mm.
If we know ourselves, we're always home anywhere. And that's, I think, the serenity and the peacefulness that we can come to if the more at home we are with ourselves, and we know who we are, we accept ourselves, our wholeness. We know that we still have parts of ourselves we wish, were a little better than they are, that are expressed better than we have expressed them. But really, yeah, knowing who we are, and that's similar to finding meaning in life, isn't it? That um, I can accept and be at home with myself without grasping and clinging or shoving things away. And it isn't being passive, but it's seeing things as they are and seeing myself as I am. Yeah, coming
Mm.
home,
I
knowing,
like the
knowing
reference
myself.
to Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz because
Yeah.
and she discovers that she has the power to go home all
Yeah.
along.
Yeah. Yeah. And
With
isn't that also is a part of it, isn't it? All along we've had that power.
I know we were there all we didn't have to go to some other place,
That's
and
right. Yeah.
but that whole you don't sugarcoat or minimize a lot of the pains of aging and loss of friends and loved
Mhm.
ones and
Hmm.
potential loneliness, and of course, infirmity and decline of certain of your senses, perhaps, and lack
Hmm.
of mobility, lack of independence, all kinds of things kind of stripped away.
Yeah.
But I really liked also that you talked about letting go of regrets,
Yeah.
letting go perhaps of resentments that you've carried with you, letting
Hmm.
go of of a certain kind of ego of wanting to be seen as a certain kind of person,
Hmm.
or your own inner self, depending on how others see you. Um,
Yeah. And letting
and
go
so
of.
it seemed like, in a way, because of all the things that are being, kind of taken away or
Hmm.
diminished, that aging really is a kind of a school for these practicing these kind of spiritual disciplines or
Hmm. Hmm.
ideals.
Yeah, it's a school of relinquishment in a lot of ways, um, but it's how we experience those relinquishments. I mean, they're going to happen.
Mhm.
I do not have as much physical energy as I used to have, or even psychic energy. I used to stay up till midnight. I could work in my office. Now 9 o'clock comes and I'm fading. It's like
Tell me
maybe
about it,
I can
sister.
maybe I can go to 10 o'clock. I don't know, but but I do get up pretty early anyway. But still, it is that is there, and I think it doesn't have to be so terrible, depending on how I approach it.
Mhm.
It's about attitude,
I think
that.
that really is sort of an underlying motif in the book, is
Mhm.
this idea and it's sort of a commonplace. You've heard it from many people before, but in this context, it's very meaningful that we can't shape or control or choose the circumstances
That's right.
of our lives,
Yeah.
but we do have some control or choice as to how we're going to respond to them,
Mhm. I,
and that
mhm.
makes a big difference.
I think that's a really good example of what you kind of started off with, Robert, when you said, this is a book for everyone, because we all want to be in control and control our lives and think, if I work hard enough, I can have what I want, and want, and get whatever I feel I deserve, or whatever. But I think that, see, as we grow older, we realize, we get better perspective on that, and realize I can't control it all. I cannot, no matter how hard I try, I can't have life always go as I want it to go. And I won't blame myself for it, which I think in younger years, gee, I didn't do the right thing. I didn't try hard enough. No, I couldn't have it all. Um, and so I think that's one of the things. Certainly, it's a common kind of thing. And in that one essay that I wrote about in the radical response in spiritual life is that we do have to let go. We have to, there is a call to detach.
Mm,
And detachment is very hard. And I think in our country, because we're so material oriented, it's not only hard to detach from material things, it's very hard to detach from our ideas. We certainly know
mm,
that now in the great divisions we have. To detach is to stand back from them. Doesn't
mm.
mean that we might not have them, but we don't hang on to them so tight that it really is painful for ourselves and other people as well. Um, so, and I quote a little bit of a Mary Oliver poem. She says that we need to love what we have, love what is mortal, but when the time comes to let it go, let it go. And I recall this one woman, a widow, and she said to me, you know, I don't resonate with that phrase "let go," but I really can do "let be." And I liked that, and it reminded me of Mary's Annunciation, "Let it be done to me," let it be. And I thought that's a good way, I think, to look at detachment, is let it be. And it's
Mm.
that serenity prayer. We talked
Mm.
about this, I think, the last time that we had a
Yes.
conversation, to change the things we can, but to accept the things we cannot change, again, I think wisdom in growing older is to know the difference. We know it more quickly maybe than we did when we were younger.
In a way, sort of, the purpose of life is to find what Jesus said to Mary, we called, the one thing necessary. And so much of our life is focused on so many different goals
Yeah.
regarding love or for friends or family or what we're going to do or achievements and that sort
Hmm.
of thing.
Hmm.
And all of those are part of life. And then sometimes we can get distracted from what's the really underlying, one thing that's necessary. A thing that made a big impact on me was a Maryknoll priest who was dying. And I said he had brain tumor, and I said, I imagine, he lived an extraordinary life. I said, I imagine you don't have a lot of regrets. He said, oh, I have lots of regrets. He said, but he'd had this kind of dream one time where he had been given by Jesus had given him this task, which was to do some kind of art project or whatever, where he was trying to do an art project, and there
Hmm.
was a limited amount of time to do it, and he was doing it in a kind of haphazard way, and sometimes applying himself and sometimes forgetting about it. And then the voice said, "Okay, time's up now," and he felt this incredible, shame or embarrassment that he hadn't done more.
Mm.
And Jesus said to him, it was never really about the art project. You know?
Wow. Oh, that is good.
Yeah, I know.
Good.
And I
I
think
love
that
it.
that is, one of the things that you're kind of writing about is this ability to, instead of thinking of all the things you didn't do or you did wish you'd done better or different choices or whatever,
Hmm.
that none of that was really what it was all about.
Hmm.
And it's really about kind of being able to receive love and reflect it back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can do that no matter how long your life is or how short.
Hmm. And it's just so true, but it is the hardest thing in our society. I have that one essay that I started with Abraham Heschel's "Just to be is a blessing, just to live is holy." And I remember when I was meeting with this group, of 90-year-olds, women who'd been in religious life for decades, they didn't understand that just to be is a blessing, because the whole life is so oriented into doing, into mission, into all of that. And so how could just being be okay? And so, it's like learning that being a kind presence, just being with another person in a loving way, it's a beautiful gift. It truly is. Um, but to trust that, because our society says, you got to show something for.
Joyce, we're actually running
Are we
out of
okay?
time now,
Sure. Hmm.
and so there's so many things I could have this conversation could continue for a long
Mm.
time because it's really about everything, not just
Thank you,
about your
Rob.
book, but all the kind of things that are stimulated for me, and I
Mm.
know it will for others who read it. And so I really uh, do want to urge people to not be misled by the subtitle to think that you have to be in your 80s or 90s to read this book. It's really for everyone, and that you've left a kind of the ripened fruit for us to enjoy, distilled from a lifetime of prayer and thinking and life and experience and wisdom. Um, there was one line I wanted to just quote at the end where you said, you were talking about the depths of the ocean and how there's so many different levels of the ocean that we never even know or see. And you said, we humans have a vast expanse of life within us that also remains to be explored. We are the oceanographers of our inner being. And I think this book is a real guide and companion for that exploration. And I think we'll encourage people to undertake it. So
Thank you.
please, thank you for joining me today. And I hope everyone will read this book, The Years of Ripening, Reflections on Aging in the Later Years. Thank you very much, Joyce.
Thank you, Robert.